Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Allison Brennan again. Allison is a New York Times best-selling author, and we're going to talk about two of her books. The latest one is See How They Hide, and it's a Quinn Costa thriller. And the one before that is The Missing Witness. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love talking to you.
Thank you. I feel the exact same way. So, I know that most people that listen to this podcast will understand, but can you tell the audience what the difference between a thriller and a mystery is?
Well, in my view, a mystery is a puzzle that you have to solve. So, and it's usually where the crime is started at the beginning of the story, and your protagonist works, whether it's an amateur sleuth or a police procedural or, a private investigator, they work to solve whatever this crime is, usually a murder, but it can be, a fraud or something like that. So it's like a puzzle that the readers solve with the protagonist. A thriller does obviously have mystery elements because you don't always know who the bad guy is. But it's more of a pacing issue. So there's a lot more, usually higher stakes. And not only are you trying to solve a crime, but you're trying to prevent a crime as well. You're trying to prevent something worse from happening. So, a thriller, the classic thriller is Die Hard, right? Here he is, the bad guys have already taken over the building, and now we got to stop them from killing everybody, right? So you have, the thriller elements, you're constantly ratcheting up the tension to where there's going to be a satisfying climax. And in the mystery, the satisfaction comes from solving the puzzle.
I think that's a perfect description. I could not have done it better. And it's nice because you are the author. So I'm glad you explained it for everyone. So these are thrillers by far. They are so exquisitely plotted out, and the pacing, you should be called the queen of pacing because the pacing is exquisite. Keeps you turning the page, wanting to know what's going to happen next. I have some friends that say they're not overly fond of reading a series. I want to say that me particularly, if I like the characters, I'm 100% in for a series. So Allison and I were talking before we started recording that See How They Hide is her latest thriller in the Quinn Costa series. I was sitting on the couch one day and I saw The Missing Witness and I said, oh, look, I already have Allison's latest book. Turns out, no, Dan was wrong. Missing Witness is from last year. So I read them out of sequence. So I read the latest one, See How They Hide, first, and then I read The Missing Witness second, even though there's book 5 and 6. They stand alone on their own. So anyone who's listening who says, I don't want to read a continuation, these are not continuations. They're continuations as far as the characters go. We see their lives. So can you give the audience an overview of who Quinn and Costa are before we get into the stories?
Yeah. And I think that when you write a series, you want readers to be able to come in at any point. And the whole point of the series is that the book itself, the story, the plot, for lack of a better word, is stands alone. You're going to resolve the core conflict of the story and have a satisfying ending. But in a series, you're following one or more character over the course of maybe their life, or at least a portion of their life, and how they grow and develop. And what I try to do is, there's a couple people that do series extremely well, and where Lisa Gardner is one of my favorite authors, and her Dee Warren series, I love it. And you follow her, but you're not getting such big jumps in what's going on in her life. It's just like kind of a gradual thing. And that's what I try to do. So in the Quinn and Costa meet, Matt Costa is an FBI special agent in charge of the mobile response team. And kind of to digress, I came up with that idea because I did the FBI Citizens Academy when I lived in Sacramento. And they have every FBI office has something called the evidence response team. And the evidence response team will come together. They're agents that have a specialty. So like one will be specialized in evidence collection, and one knows about bombs, and one knows about this, and they get specialized training. So when you have a complex case, they will all come together and work that case. And they did, I learned about it through the Yosemite, Carrie Stainer and the Yosemite murders, because you're in California. Anybody from California remembers these. The Yosemite murders, the evidence response team took over that case because it went throughout the entire Northern California, all the way from Yosemite, all the way up to the Oregon border. And it was fascinating listening to them. I said, oh, I would love to write about a team like that. But I don't want to be just set it in one location. I want them to be travel over, because I get bored and I want to learn about new places. So I came up with the mobile response team, which is based on the evidence response team, but they go to small and rural areas in order where local authorities may not have the resources to be able to tackle some complex cases. So that way I get to play with new things. And the first book was a serial killer, and it happened to be that Matt Costa was assigned because it was a killer who kills in threes every 3 years. So as soon as the first victim dropped, they knew there was going to be 2 more. And so Matt and his team immediately go there. He just newly formed team. They only have 3 members. Kara Quinn was raised in the teeny town of Liberty Lake, which is outside Spokane. Spokane is not very big, so when you talk teeny town outside Spokane, it is 7,000 people. And she's there on administrative leave, and she is there staying with her grandma because her grandmother raised her as a teenager. Stays with her grandma, and she happens to have found the first body when she's jogging around the lake. And so she kind of immerses herself in the FBI investigation. And that's kind of how they meet. Now, she was on administrative leave, and by the end of the book, this isn't really giving anything too much away. She can't go back because the guy she put in prison put basically a bounty on her head. So she is now assigned to the FBI, at least until the trial, which brings us to the missing witness, which is the trial of the guy that put the bounty on her head. So she goes back to Los Angeles to testify. And that's kind of where we started. That's kind of how the background of the story is. So we had several books where they're working together, and she's constantly trying to get back to Los Angeles.
That's so fun because, of course, living here in Los Angeles, I got to see some of the sights and sounds and smells of LA, good, bad, or indifferent, because you lived here, so you know there's both good, bad, and indifferent here. So that's one of the things that, so with Kara, she has a hope of returning to LA. She has a home here, and she's, everything she does, she gives it her heart, her soul. She puts 100% into whatever she's doing. And she has this concept about where she thinks her life is going. But Allison Brennan, the author, decided that, oh no, we're going to have some other things go on. So in The Missing Witness, so much of this revolves around the unhoused population. And everybody in this country realizes that, and around the world, but I think especially in this country, we have so many unhoused people, and they become like an inanimate object. And in some ways, I know this is going to sound a little cruel probably, but they become like a fire hydrant. They're on a corner, but they're a nuisance. You got to step around it. And I think that the majority of people, while they may be very empathetic to what's going on, I've seen people stop in the middle of traffic to collect a stray dog on the freeway. But we don't collect stray homeless people, but with the same way. And there's a big reason. With an animal, you can care for them and feed them, and they will love you back. A human has complexities to them. It's not there. We may be animals, but it's a very different type of thing. So what made you want to tackle the unhoused population in The Missing Witness?
Well, when I was when I was conceiving the story idea, and I knew it was going to be set in Los Angeles, and I knew it was going to resolve a lot of Kara's issues with regards to why she was on administrative leave, how she got there, the trial against David Chen, who was a human trafficker. He basically imported Chinese slaves. He was a Chinese American. He imported Chinese slaves for slave labor. And I came up with that idea actually reading an article years and years ago when I don't remember what law enforcement entity raided a sweatshop in Los Angeles, and it happened to have been in Chinatown. So that was kind of in the back of my mind of that storyline. And then I realized if you're going to have a sweatshop in Los Angeles, you have to bribe people. You have OSHA, you have local, inspectors, you have law enforcement that walks the streets. You have so many people that you actually either they have to turn a blind eye or you have to bribe them to get it. So then fast forward, as I was developing all this stuff, obviously the homeless crisis has been a huge, being from California myself, it's a huge issue everywhere. And I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, and there it's been a problem a lot longer than other areas.
Yeah.
And I ended up meeting this guy. Well, online I met him. We connected online, but we've talked many, many times, named Kevin Dahlgren. And I've actually put his name in the acknowledgments, and you can go to his webpage. I think I put it in there, but he has a Substack where he writes about the homeless crisis and everything that he has done and what all the problems are. So I talked to him multiple times. Then I read an article written by Katie Grimes, who's a Sacramento area reporter, who I loosely knew when I lived in Sacramento, but read an article that she had written where she tracked all of these non-governmental organizations, these NGOs we hear a lot about now, but this was, when I was writing this, was several years ago. She had tracked these NGOs who received government grants, who then took $1 million, paid their staff of 2 people, a president and a treasurer, and then like large amounts of money, we're talking about like $200,000 a year just to file paperwork, to get the money, file the paperwork, and then disperse half of the money they get to another NGO, who then takes a cut and then disperses the money to somebody else who takes a cut and then maybe will feed people. And she tracked all of this and did this huge report on it. I cannot remember it might have been California Journal, it might have been a think tank. I'm not quite sure where she wrote the report. And then she sent everything to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General did nothing about it. This was 2017-18. So I talked to her about her report, and she sent me all of her documentation. And I said, there's a story in here, and I got to figure out how to tell it. So I decided to tell it through the eyes of my secondary character, Violet, whose mother is homeless, because I felt I wanted to show kind of in a raw way. I mean, being homeless, it's not glamorous. A lot of people want to stay homeless because they don't want to be responsible for anything, but they are raped, they sell their bodies for drugs. Most of them are drug addicts or have been drug addicts. One of the things Kevin told me that really stood out is that virtually everyone, not everyone, but a huge percentage, like 80%, were abused or sexually assaulted as children. They then, as they grow up, they can't deal with it. They start self-medicating. The drugs, they end up losing their families or their jobs, because a lot of times they don't even address it until they're in their 30s or 40s. The drugs are a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more drugs you take, the worse you are, and you end up losing your job and going homeless. And so I want to kind of show the rawness of it while also showing that they were human. It's something that we walk by and say, oh, well, they have every right to do this, or they have every right to do that, and we just need to give them clean needles so they don't get AIDS. And I had one line in the book, which I fully agree with, was when Violet said, we give them clean needles so they don't get hepatitis, but we don't care that when they die of a drug overdose a year later. And that's kind of my sentiment about it.
Yes, and that line stood out to me, Allison, because I think that is, it's sad, but it's so true. It's also what we do with just everyday mental health in this country. As long as it doesn't affect me directly, if your mental health issues don't impact my everyday life, then you should be free to do what you want, but yet we don't give you the help. And I'm not sure how we give you the help. So I don't want to say that, oh, one person's not doing the right thing, because it's a huge nasty bubble that just sort of rolls around on the streets of big cities like Los Angeles. And everybody sees it, but no one knows exactly what to do with it. But I think a lot of times we do some things that make it even worse, and we call it trying to help, but it's not helping in the long run.
And I think one of the things that I wanted to address, because I don't usually write about social issues only because I don't want to get, I write to entertain.
Right.
But first of all, I needed a crime. And I felt that the fraud that I have seen and I've read about, and I've talked to Kevin Dahlgren about, who I want to say his blog is called Truth on the Streets, and then talking to Katie Grimes and talking to these other people, these are crimes. Now, whether they're crimes because technically they get these grants legally. Now, I did make mine a crime because of who profited from the grants and how the grants were established and things like that. So I was able to create a crime, but it was something to be able to prove that. I had to tell a story. So to have a story, you have to have a murder. At least for me, I have to have a murder. So the assistant district attorney, in The Missing Witness, the assistant district attorney is killed, and he was investigating something, and then all of his records end up missing. They don't know that they're missing right away. So this is all part of the investigations. I don't want to give away everything, but I did want to show that through Violet, who is an IT person, and she's kind of helping the district attorney because she works for City Hall. So she's helping him gather information because she knows where to get it. But her mom is homeless. So she has another reason for doing it, because California spends billions of dollars, and it has not fixed the problem. Mm-hmm. I think that anytime you spend $12 billion a year, if you're not fixing the problem and it's only getting worse, then maybe you're not spending your money in the right way. And so that's kind of that would have been my social commentary. It's like, I have no problem spending money to solve this problem, but I do have a problem wasting money and not solving the problem. So that was kind of the thing. But I did it with murder. I did it also with my human interest with Violet and what she faced with her mother, and all of the barriers that she faced to try to get her mother off the streets are all based on true stories. Different people, obviously, because not everybody's going to encounter every single thing, but you kind of have to all put it into one person for a book. Otherwise, it'll be 1,000 pages.
Well, and to come back to something I said earlier, being the queen of pacing, that was one of the things that you did. You paced us through it. You gave us a lot of information. So I'm going to share this with the audience because I already know this. I knew this from having a client that does construction. So in building housing, whether it's for unhoused people or apartments or condos, it's called by the door. And I find it's a cute little phrase, but it's one of those phrases that sort of distracts you from the big picture. So in LA, it's between $850,000 and $1 million a door. So if you build an apartment complex that has 10 units in it, it's $1 million a door. So it's $10 million to build this apartment complex. And so that's one of the things with the unhoused population, that they throw all this money at it. But as you say, it goes from one LLC to another one to another. So by the time it gets watered down, there's never enough money to really build a per door. And it's a huge issue. And we passed a $14 billion bond here in LA a few years ago to build affordable housing. And as I know today, none of it's been spent because no one can afford to build it. So it's like, it's a cycle. But it does make for an interesting read because you give us some information in this book that is truthful information and it's factual information, but it's not reading a book report. You give us a great thriller to go along with it.
I hope so, because like I said, I want to entertain. I don't want people, but on this issue in particular, I think that if you could read it in the form of a thriller and then realize that, wait a minute, why are we spending all these? Where is this money going? And I think once you know it, because it's one thing to build housing for the homeless, but once they're in there, what are we going to do? How are we going to get them off drugs? Because a lot of them, they're not going to be able to maintain. Are we going to say, oh, here's your house, now we're done with you? Because they're going to be on the streets. So anyway,
Well, yes.
it's just it's a complex issue, and it's something, but you have to treat each one of them as a human being because
Yes.
they are humans, and allowing them to die on the street of drug overdoses and disease is not humane. We are
No.
treating them worse than we treat animals. We don't
Absolutely.
allow animals to do this. So
Nope.
why are we allowing human beings? And that is where I kind of draw the line on it. This is not how we treat people.
No, and it's not fixing the issue that needs to be fixed or addressed, because
Yeah.
it is, as you say, it just becomes a cycle. So now let's talk about see how they hide. So now here you've set up a story that I was so mesmerized by, Allison. It was just so wonderful, and I thought to myself, "What a twisted person my friend is." So, so here you set us up with two murders, sort of what I might say on opposite sides of this country that happen at the same time in the same way. So, where in the heavens, which bag did you pull that idea out of, my friend?
That was actually so I was thinking, okay, what am I gonna, what I'm gonna write the next book on? You're always thinking, okay, what's the next book? And I kind of said, well, what if there were two murders on opposite coasts? What would they do? I mean, it was just like, I don't know, what would my team do? And I said, oh, okay, that'll be fun. And so I just created the crimes. I literally had no idea. You talk about plotting. I had no idea why these two people were killed until I started writing the book. It was actually after I introduced the character of Riley, which was like maybe chapter 4 or 5, I don't remember. When I introduced her, and then I said, oh, now I'm getting kind of an idea of what's going on in the story. And because she was kind of the key. And so, yeah, for the first 5 chapters, I had no idea. I was basically just investigating these two crimes and learning with my characters what needed to be learned. And so then when I met Riley, I said, okay, she's kind of the core story. So what is she going to do now? And then I kind of followed her. And so one of the nice things about being a writer is that once I kind of have these little epiphanies, I can always go back and edit the beginning of the book, because I don't always know what's going to happen. But usually the hints are there, and I figure it out as I go along, and then I get really excited. So there's always a point in the book where I go, it's all coming together. And then I start writing really, really, really fast. And it's usually around midpoint of the book where I'm still not really knowing what's going on until about the midpoint of the book. And then all of a sudden it kind of clicks for me. And I quickly write the ending, and then I go back to the beginning and, clean it all up.
So when I interviewed Karen Robard, she, like you, is an organic writer, and she said to me her favorite part was the editing part. Is that your favorite part now that you've discovered where the story is going, or is it the
I like
discovery of the
editing.
story? Okay.
I think the discovery is the most exciting part. I will say that when I get to that point where it's all coming together, I get really excited, and it's like I don't even want to stop writing. And so I will write a couple of days, just hours and hours and hours whereas the beginning of the book, which is a lot harder, it's kind of like pulling teeth. I do like editing, but I think it's the discovery. It's when it all comes together and writing the last, the climax, the last 100 pages of the book where everything is finally coming together and I get to see kind of the fruit of my labor. That is the most exciting part.
I agree with you. And I find, so I don't know about you, because I'm certainly nowhere even, I can't even wipe your feet at this point. But when I write something, my characters actually speak to me. I hear a distinctive voice. What about you? Did Riley's voice come to you, or did you have to polish it? Does that make sense? I mean, for me, I hear them. I even hear a cadence when I write somebody.
Yeah, I think I do hear them, especially when I read, when I do editing, I read it out loud. So I'll
Okay.
be reading as I'm writing dialogue. I'll talk to myself. My kids always tease me about that because I'll be mumbling, and mostly because I want the dialogue to sound real. But I'm a very visual person, so I actually see the scene So it's almost like I'm like this person standing and watching the scene unfold, like, like people say like a movie or whatever, but I'm a little closer to that. And I'll be watching back and forth and how it, hear them, whatever they're saying, but it's mostly because I'm observing them. And then I try to get it all down as best I can.
I love that. I love that. So now, what were the benefits or pitfalls of having Quinn and Costa have a relationship besides just a working relationship, have a personal relationship? What are the benefits or pitfalls of that?
Well, I think it's realistic. I think people sometimes that work really closely together, they do tend to have a relationship. They're both single. Um, Little side note, in the first book, The Third to Die, they weren't really working together. They were, Kara was on administrative leave, Matt was an agent. They kind of just fell in bed because it was an intense case and they were attracted to each other. They didn't have a relationship, they had sex. Over the course of the next, now it's been a book. Yeah, it's the sixth book, takes place, it's about 15 months after they met, maybe 13 months after they met. Now they have a relationship. So it's kind of how that has evolved. I like it because I started my career writing romantic suspense. I don't consider this romantic suspense because the relationship is not the core part of the story. But I also think it connects the characters and makes them realistic. And I like it when that happens. I like how they evolve and how the different conflicts. And I like, when they're not going to always have conflicts in every single book. Like I wrote the Lucy Kincaid series, that's 17 books, and Sean and Lucy were together from the very beginning. They don't have a conflict in every book. That would be like, oh my gosh, it would give me a headache.
Right.
But
Right.
every once in a while, they have a conflict that is organic to the characters and to the story itself. And then it makes a lot of, I think it makes it more satisfying. One of the pitfalls is that people say, oh, I don't understand why, you have every character has to have sex with, da, 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 da. It's like, okay, I'm sorry. It's like 3 pages in a 400-page book that has sex. I don't think that that's gratuitous, and I don't think
it's I assume, and now I'm gonna step out here and I may get hate mail for this. I just assume that's a person who's single and bitter. I mean, honestly, if you can't read a little romance in a thriller, then it's on you, not the author. So I'm like, because one of the things I do want to compliment you on, because so Matt Costa is so attuned to not only his feelings but to Kara's feelings, and he goes out of his way to make sure that she's comfortable. It is so beautiful to read, Allison, because it's there are people out in this world that really do care about how their feelings are, and Matt does that with Kara, and it is so beautiful. You've created such a beautiful backstory for Matt. I love that.
Well, thank you. I like him as a character. I think Kara said it. I do not remember what book she said this in, but it's one of my favorite lines that, he's an alpha male that tries really hard to be beta. But he's a cop.
Yes.
He is a cop, and he's a very strong masculine character, but that doesn't mean that he has to be like completely ignorant of how people are thinking. I think, I look to my oldest son, he's 23. He's, he works out. He's 6'3". He's a large, broad guy. He's and he's very masculine and, full beard, all that stuff. But at the same time, he is one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. And he hates it when I say this, but I remember I hate spiders. I literally hate spiders. I will step on them. I will squash them. I used to vacuum them up because I didn't even want to squash them because I didn't get close to them, right? So I would vacuum him. He couldn't stand it because he thought the spider would be suffering in the vacuum. So he would tell me, okay, give me a chance to get the spider out of the house. And I said, okay, he's outside. That's his territory. That's fine. So He would get, take the spider, put him outside, and I wouldn't vacuum him up. But he's a tough guy. And he is very masculine, but he cares about, critters.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I kind of see that with Matt. Matt is a very strong, um, he is definitely a leader. He is in charge, but he also listens to his team. And I think a good leader is always going to make the decision, and the decision's on him. But he's also going to listen to the experts. And then because he's a good leader, even if he chooses a different path, they're going to follow him because he has proven himself. And that's kind of how I see Matt.
I love that. So will there be a 7th book?
Yes, I'm writing it now. It's called Make It Out Alive. And it takes Matt and Kara to Florida, where they go undercover to catch a killer who targets newlyweds, and at a resort.
I love that. I love that. So the 2 books are The Missing Witness and See How They Hide. How excited was Dan for having 2 of these to read? I just loved both of them, Allison. So do you have a social media or a website you'd like to share with the audience?
My website is AllisonBrennan.com. Very easy to remember. And all my social media links are right there on the front page. I do go to Facebook every day to answer questions or whatever, and I respond to all my email. So the contact form is on my webpage. So if anybody ever has questions, I have nothing else to do other than write and answer email.
Well, you owe Dan book number 7, so you have a responsibility.
Absolutely.
So I'll
make sure you get it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, Allison. This has been a great deal of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.